topic is going to be Purim, which is a Jewish holiday coming up in 2 days. And we're really excited about it because it's like it's like the Halloween of Judaism. So with no further ado, here's Rabbi Levi Friedman. Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, Susan. How are you?
Very, very good. Very excited about the holiday coming up.
Very excited about the holiday coming up, but it is not the Jewish Halloween.
No, it's like the secular Halloween as we dress up in costumes is what I meant.
There's costumes.
Yes, definitely.
That's about where, and there's candy as well, typically, but that's about where the similarities end.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of Purim and how it came about?
Right. So the story of Purim is described in the book of Esther, which is one of the books of the Bible. And you'll find much of what you need to know about the events surrounding the holiday there in the book of Esther. So I'd refer everybody there to the book of Esther. The events take place about 2,400 years ago, give or take, about in the year 357 before the Common Era, they're about in the 350s. And the Jewish people at the time are exiled out of Israel. They're between the two temples. So there was a temple that stood in Jerusalem, which was destroyed. And then they're about 50 years into an exile after the destruction of the temple. And the Jewish people were sort of scattered around outside of Israel as well. There were some that were still in Israel, but most of them were out in Babylon and so on. And the story of Purim takes place in Persia, in modern day Iran. Mm-hmm. In a place called Shushan, which I think today would be Susa. I think there's actually an archaeological dig there where they've unearthed the palace of Achashverosh. There's some controversy as to who exactly the king in the story of Purim is, but that's maybe for another talk. Mm-hmm. At any rate, the Jewish people are in Persia, and
how many Jews would you say there are?
I don't know. That I don't know.
Okay. Couple million, I guess.
Probably.
Yeah, at least.
But in Iran, probably less, I would guess, at the time.
Okay.
Probably significantly less. Probably you're talking about maybe even under 1 million. I'm not really sure. Okay. Megillah actually lists the amount of people that die in the end of the story, which is significant numbers. But at any rate, the Jewish people are now in a foreign land under a foreign government. And through a series of incredible events, they end up in a position where they, on the one hand, are facing total annihilation, extermination. The first time that the Jewish people are facing complete genocide and the total destruction of the Jewish people. And then through these different events that take place, seemingly natural coincidences, they're in position to thwart this decree. That's sort of the overall sort of arc of the story. And they are given a chance to defend themselves, which they do, and they defeat their enemy, and the threat is averted, and that turns into a holiday. So, but specifically, the story centers around the two heroes of the story are Mordechai, who was the leader of the Jewish people in the diaspora at the time, and his cousin Esther, who becomes the queen, really, of Persia, and is in the palace and in a position to be able to intercede and stop this decree from being carried out.
But why was it a decree?
So what happened was there was this king Achashverosh, as he's referred to in the Torah, in the Bible, and they say that would be Xerxes would be the Persian king, the Persian name, and he. So he had a trusted advisor who he promotes to basically the prime minister, essentially, of his kingdom. So he was running everything, and he was a terrible anti-Semite. His name was Haman. He was a descendant of the people of Amalek, which were a notoriously anti-Semitic, really a genocidal people that were just bent on destroying the Jewish people. So he was a descendant of theirs, and he devises this plan to exterminate the Jewish people. Now, the reason this threat was very serious was because at that time, the king of Persia ruled over the entire world. And so Jews, wherever they were living in the world at the time, were really under his jurisdiction. And so it was the first time they had this threat that was a legitimate threat where had it gone through, there was the authority to be able to carry it out. And so that was the plan that was devised. But in the meantime, Esther, through, as I mentioned, this series of events, ends up becoming the queen of Persia. Mordecai tells her before she goes and gets taken to the king's harem, where because he was on a queen search. He tells her not to divulge her identity, who she is, where she comes, her people. And so there's this big mystery that is unfolding as the events, even the threat starts to develop. But before that, from when she's in the palace, the king is really curious about her identity. And the more that she doesn't divulge it and doesn't share it with him, the more curious it becomes, the more mysterious of a figure she becomes. And finally, this plan is hatched for the Jewish people to be annihilated. Mordecai, who hears about it, goes and sends a message to Esther and says, "You need to step in. This is the reason you were put in the position you're in." And so Esther does. She throws a party and she invites the king. She invites Haman. Eventually, she outs Haman she identifies herself as a Jew and says that Haman's trying to destroy the Jews. Now, that's a simple sort of part of the narrative. Really, the story is a lot more complex, obviously, a lot more nuanced. And there are many other details that, on one hand, make it that much more fascinating. But at the same time, the more you understand the details in the context of the story, as it's detailed in the book of Esther, as well as in the commentaries throughout the generations that sort of filled in a lot of the gaps that the book of Esther has, it becomes something that becomes more reasonable to understand how she schemed and how she planned to be able to undo this.
She was a very strong woman. I mean, she fasted for 3 days? Yeah. In defiance, and she was a tough cookie.
Right. Well, so it's interesting that I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today before the show, and he was pointing out something interesting, that when you're introduced to Esther in the book of Esther, she has no voice. She has she has no opinion. You don't hear from her. Everything we know about her is all anecdotal in a sense, or indirect, because we're talking really about Mordecai is a central figure. Even her going to the palace, she's taken to the palace. She didn't go of her own will. And then when she's in the harem and it's time for her to go, she's dragged practically before the king. Mm-hmm. She doesn't give an opinion about anything. Things just seem to be happening to her, and she doesn't, on the one hand, doesn't resist. And so you don't hear her voice. Mm-hmm. And the first time you hear her voice is after this decree, when Mordecai sends a message to her that something is happening and that this is the time now for you to step up. Suddenly she swings in to action, and she becomes immediately, she's assertive. Immediately she's calling all the shots, which is very interesting. Yeah. Up to this point in the book, we don't hear from her, right? We talk a little bit about her, but things are just happening with her.
And at this point, she's a queen.
And she's a queen, and still she has no voice. Yeah. Right? Nobody cares what she thinks about anything, it seems. And then the moment Mordecai comes to her and says, "You need to do something," suddenly she takes charge of the situation. She's the one who plots how this is going to unfold. She's the one who dictates to him what he should be doing and how everything is going to go. So she becomes and then from that point forward, the rest of the book, she's the one calling all these shots.
You heard the old saying, "Listen to your wife"?
I've never heard that before.
Never heard that before? Yeah, this is the time. Listen to your wife.
So it's incredible that. So we were reflecting on one of the ideas, because in Judaism, everything we learn a lesson from, and certainly the story of Purim. We can talk maybe about some of the lessons and the meaning of Purim, but a very important lesson is that there are people that have a lot to say and a lot to offer, and all you have to do is really ask. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we're afraid to ask, or we're afraid to empower somebody because we don't know, maybe they won't live up to it, maybe they can't rise to the occasion. But the truth is, more often than not, people can rise to the occasion. If you just empower them, you ask them to open their mouth. What is your opinion? What do you think? It's amazing what you'll find.
And it's the quiet ones that have a lot of knowledge and information.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So continuing on with the story.
So continuing on with the story, she orchestrates these events to sort of get Achashverosh, her husband, more suspicious of Haman, who is his trusted prime minister, who is running everything, and then maybe get him to start thinking of some conspiracy theories that might be unfolding behind his back. He was probably paranoid as a king. Everybody's after your throne. And she timed everything and positioned it just right so that he would be at maximum level of suspicion and paranoia, and then she identifies herself and outs Haman as the one who's trying to annihilate her people. And so it's the perfect storm that she creates, and Haman is eliminated, and the Jewish people are provided the opportunity to defend themselves.
Haman and his other
Haman and his merry men.
10 altogether.
Well, his 10 sons, but
Yeah.
also all those that sought to rise up against the Jewish people on that day, they were all defeated.
And how what's the period? A couple months. What is this time period?
The events in the book of Esther span several years. From when we're introduced to, from when the story is introduced, the king is introduced, and the party that he throws. So it takes several years to unfold. And then the decree was sort of hanging over the people for a year. Haman is eliminated at some point before that, a few months before, but the decree was still hanging over their heads for about a year, that they were facing this challenge. Now, what's interesting is that after this victory, so Esther, again, calling the shots, goes to the rabbis and says, this is how I want this to go down in history, how I want it to be remembered. We want this book chronicled. We want the day celebrated. So her and Mordechai basically established this holiday that is obviously then certified and by the rabbinic authorities at the time. And so Purim becomes a Jewish holiday.
So it was written by Esther.
Written by Esther and Mordechai, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
And it's a day that's observed even with certain traditions, certain things that we do on that day. So Purim, for instance, this year is going to be Thursday night and Friday. We know that in Judaism, the day starts at night after sundown. So Purim, which is Friday, starts on the evening before Thursday night. And on Thursday night, we're gonna read the book of Esther. We read it out of a scroll, the original text, and so that where we read the entire story, and it's a form of celebration and thanksgiving to God for this holiday.
And we all dress up in characters.
And then there's the dressing. We'll get back to the dressing up in a moment. But let's, the next day, Friday, we're going to read the Megillah. That's what it's called, the Megillah, which means a scroll. So the book of Esther, we're going to read it again on Friday. And we're going to observe the holiday with three other things. One is to have a festive meal to celebrate. Another one is to give gifts to the poor, to at least two needy people or families, or to charities. So to give a gift to at least two charities, and the more the merrier, obviously, and then to give gifts of food to our friends and neighbors. That's the way we celebrate. So the holiday is very much about celebration, about joy, and about giving and sharing, which are obviously linked ideas. The idea of being happy, which would then lead to sharing, or sharing that makes you happy, the ultimate, real, true type of joy and happiness. And then there's the other traditions, one of them being getting dressed up, which is a custom. That's not one of the actual observances, core observances of Purim. The ones that I mentioned are, right, hearing the Megillah twice, at night and by day, and then the gifts to a friend, the gifts to charity, and the festive meal. Those are the core observances of Purim. But then there are other customs. So one of them being the getting dressed up. And the reason we dress up on Purim is because the miracle of Purim was dressed up. It itself was, when we wear a mask, we conceal our true identity. And when we read the story of Purim, we're reading a story that looks like just a series of coincidences that took place, right? Just a very natural way of things unfolding. And yeah, maybe the odds are not good that these things can unfold exactly the way they did, but that's how it happens, right? It seems like a very serendipitous sort of series of events. But of course, there's no such thing. Everything is orchestrated by God. And so the story of Purim is God working, in a sense, behind the scenes, as it were. It's not an overt miracle like the splitting of the sea. It's not an overt miracle, right? Like the experience of being taken out of Egypt, or the protection that was offered in the desert. It just seems like a natural, normal occurrence. And the brilliance of Purim and the great joy of Purim, the great celebration of Purim, is related to the fact that God is concealed in the story, which sounds sort of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
You think the more you could see God, right, the better. But to the Purim teaches us the opposite, which is that the more we can find God hiding in everyday life and in mundane events and activities and experiences, the closer we feel to him, right? So it's not just about seeking out God in the miraculous and the supernatural. It's when we find God in the everyday, in the mundane, in the natural, in the ordinary, that's true celebration. Because if God is just a part of our lives, that we're regular people just slogging through this lifetime and this world as creatures of nature, and limited to the confines of nature, and then God is just some idea or energy that we can tap into to step out of our everyday life. Then God and our relationship with God exists outside of our everyday life.
It's
right?
easier. You talk about that, but somebody. I try that.
You tried what?
I try to see God in a lot of things, and then my ego gets in there and he says, "Oh, come on, God and everything, come on." So I'm still working on it. I think it could be a lifelong, but I think we all work on that. But
that's one of the enduring messages of Purim, is to find God in everything. The fascinating thing is that the book of Esther is a book in the Bible, right? In the Old Testament, it's a holy book, and yet God's name doesn't appear a single time in the book, not once. And so that's a fascinating idea, that you could have a book that's talking about a Jewish holiday where it's written and it's recorded and it's memorialized because of the great miracle, right? And yet God doesn't appear anywhere in the book. His name doesn't appear anywhere clearly in the book. And that's because that was how this miracle unfolds. And so it's the perfect message for us today. Not only did the events of Purim happen in a time of exile, in a time of divine concealment, but we're also in that kind of situation now, where we don't see God, we don't see the supernatural, we don't see the miraculous. That's and even those of us that are looking for the miraculous and try to find the supernatural and the natural, and there are people that succeed at doing that. But even then, that's sort of a departure from the everyday. It's sort of something that's outside of the everyday life. And
when we think of miracles, we think of big things happening, and you're talking about the little miracles that we tend not to notice.
Absolutely, like when you wake up in the morning, that itself is a miracle, a miracle of life, and all the different things that happen in our lives. And if we can, I think sometimes we may have spoken about this when we were talking about a different topic in the past, but I think that we can lessen our anxiety in general in life when we recognize that God is calling the shots. It's when we think we're constantly wrestling for control of everything, to control every element of our lives, right? We want to be able to control the process. We want to be able to control the outcome. We want to control all of that. And the more control we think we're going to have, the more we think we're going to be comfortable and we'll be happy, right? But the truth is the opposite. The more control we think we have, which is obviously illusion, the more, or put it in other terms, the more we can cede control to God and recognize that He's calling the shots and has a plan and is working sometimes overtly, sometimes behind the scenes, and that everything in the end works out, the happier we can be.
Well,
the freer we can be.
There's an old saying, man plans and God laughs.
I thought you were going to go back to listen to your wife. That was another old saying. I'm just trying to remember that one. I'm going to have to write that one down.
Yeah, I think you should.
So man plans and God laughs. Well, ultimately, but I think the follow-up to that statement would be that man has to learn how to laugh as well.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is man plans, God laughs, and then we get frustrated. Right?
And angry.
But what we should do is say, well, maybe after all, I'm not in control. God is in control. And then if we can laugh about that, we can be a lot.
But we still have to move forward and do things.
Absolutely.
Not just lay back and say, oh, God will handle everything.
Absolutely. Well, God will handle everything, but that we deal with. We're going to have to move forward and to work and to plan and to progress. And then ultimately everything works out exactly.
The story of Esther is not far from the truth of what takes place today in present. Antisemitism, wanting to destroy a whole people, not just the Jewish people, but people around the world. You see that in Syria and everything nowadays, which is horrendous. So I'm not sure if we've learned our lesson. I mean,
right.
When are we going to learn this lesson?
Absolutely. Well, we see, anti-Semitism is the oldest type of bigotry and hatred that exists and still alive and well today. But yeah, what's interesting is Haman, who we mentioned, is a big anti-Semite, and he talks to the king about destroying the Jews. And he takes things that could be seen potentially as a positive, and he makes them a negative. But one of the things he talks about is that the people are different. They're just different, and they're weird. They're other. They're not like us. And
they look different. They act different.
So you can make the argument that that's a reason that's beautiful, right? And yet it's all a matter of your attitude or your perspective. So he talks about the fact that people are different, and that gives him license to want to do away with them. They're different. They don't fit in. They don't comply. And so the easiest solution is to get rid of them. That's a message that still exists today, and hatred of differences. But hopefully we've evolved enough to recognize that there's great value in our differences, and the fact that no two people are the same, that we're all different stripes and
also
colors.
if we can recognize that we are all anti-Semitic. I mean, we're all prejudiced in one way or another towards a certain group of people. We're not all pure and wonderful. And once we can accept that about ourselves, maybe it opens up other doors to things.
Well, that's a very interesting statement that I'd like to unpack. I don't know if this is not, I don't know if we have much time we have
it's
left.
It's a different show. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's going to be a different show. But I think that the emphasis may be in the wrong place when we talk about anti-Semitism and bigotry and hatred. And rather than focus on eradicating the hatred within other people, which obviously we should all have hearts that are free of hatred. There shouldn't be any of it. But rather than focus our attention there, the attention has to be focused somewhere else, which is, just because you hate me doesn't mean you can hurt me. And we have to teach that respect that we have to have for each other, the respect we have to have for life in general as well. And so just because you're different doesn't give me license to harm you, or just because you're different, or just because I hate you doesn't mean that I can harm you. And so the conclusion of maybe, in a sense, what Haman said to the king about the Jewish people was all kind of true. He wasn't actually even making anything up, right? There are one people. They're distinct. They're scattered in the nation among all the peoples of the kingdom, and their religion is different. They practice a different faith, and they have a different God that they worship. All of that was true, and what's the conclusion, though? So therefore you kill them?
Right.
Right? That's the wrong conclusion. So it's not even a matter of trying to soften that or soften those edges or blur the distinctions between us. You say, well, there's anti-Semitism, because we're different. So what's the solution? Let's not be as different. Let's fit in and blend in a little bit more. That's not going to be the answer, right? Those divisions, those lines are important, and they're good, and they can be very useful in society. But what we need to do is not look to harm people that are different, that live by different values. So I think that's one of the messages of Purim. I want to share another thought I heard from Rabbi Felig this week that I think is just worth sharing. Okay. We say in the book of Esther, so towards the end, as Esther's plan is starting to develop, so she calls a feast. She has a party just for her, Achashverosh the king, and Haman. And they come to the party. So it's just the three of them at the party. And at the party, the king says, Esther, my queen, up to what do you want? Why did you call this party? What do you want? I'll give you up to half the kingdom. And Esther says, you know what I want? I'd like to have another party tomorrow night, just the three of us. And then I'm going to tell the king what he really wants to know. So that raises the intrigue and the mystery. And sure enough, the next night they come back, and it's the next night at the second party that Esther says, I'm Jewish. Haman is trying to kill my people. And then whatever happens over there. There's a little bit of a scene that's created, and then Haman is off to the gallows. So the question is, if Esther's sitting there with the king and Haman, the clock is ticking. There's this decree against the Jewish people that's there. Haman is plotting to eliminate Mordechai, the leader of the Jewish people in Persia at the time. And at the time is of the essence. Why would you risk throwing another part? Maybe the king can't come the next day. Maybe he's got other plans. Maybe Haman's got other plans. And right now you've got him. You've got it's the three of you. It's the perfect opportunity. Seize that moment. So there's Rabbi Fellow shared this the other day with me, and I think it's really worth repeating. When Haman came to the party, he was very excited that first night. It was just him, the king, and the queen. Haman had his sights set on
Haman's
greatness.
The bad guy.
Haman is the bad guy. He has his sights set on world dominion. He's very diabolical. And when he's invited sort of to this inner circle, just the three of them, that it was a validation for him of everything he had worked for, everything he was aspiring to. And so he sees his plan unfolding exactly the way he wants it, right? Which is he's rising to the top. When Esther's sitting at the party with the two of them, she sees that Haman is in a good mood. He's happy. And so she decides tonight's not the night. He's too happy. It's not tonight. So she calls another party the next night. Now, again, part of the series of events that take place in between the two parties, Haman ends up parading Mordechai, his arch nemesis, through the streets of Shushan. And when he comes to the party, he's miserable on the second night.
Mhm.
So the first night Haman shows up to the party, he's on the top of the world. Second night he shows up to the party, he's miserable. And it's that moment that Esther seizes to expose him. And so the lesson is very, very obvious here. When we're happy, we can be invincible.
Mm.
It doesn't, and even someone who's as bad as Haman, even somebody evil who's going to get what's coming to them ultimately, right? Because crime doesn't pay, and certainly he will meet his he'll have what he'll have the whatever it is that he's trying to serve on others is going to certainly come back to him. But at the time that he's happy, that's a lot more challenging. It's when he was miserable, when he was down, that Esther recognized when he's feeling down, when he's feeling sluggish, he's feeling depressed, there's doubt, that's when he can be exposed.
Smart woman.
And so, yeah, certainly. And I think that's a message and a lesson for all of us, that if we can be happy, and part of that happiness, and Purim being the festival of joy, the happiest day on the Jewish calendar in the year, if we can be happy, and that happiness comes from giving and sharing, because there's like this loop that you can create. If you're not happy, why don't you give to somebody else? That'll make you happy. If you're happy, you're more inclined to give to others. So there's this loop. And so the holiday of Purim, being the happiest day of the year, it involves giving and sharing. The festive meal where you're sharing with others, the gifts that you give to others, the gifts that you give to charity, all built into the holiday. All of that is there designed to stimulate that joy, and the joy is there to be expressed through giving. That's the ultimate kind of a joy. And when we can be joyous, we can be happy and share, and also be joyous, because we'll unburden ourselves from thinking that we have to carry ourselves and carry our life, and carry our burden, because we don't know where God is. But no, the lesson of Purim is to find God in everything we have, to recognize that God carries our burden. He's there beside us constantly. Then we can be lighter and we can be happier. And so we end up in an endless loop of joy and of happiness. And then the world obviously ends up being a much better place because of it.
What a wonderful story. There's so many lessons in that story, and we've barely touched on them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, happy Purim.
Happy Purim to you as well.
I hope you have a wonderful time. Thank you very much for joining us. You can find us on,
right here.
If
they're watching this, then they have found us.
YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. What else? I mean, 8 different places you can find us, and the community newspaper's own website. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on Ask the Rabbi.